So we'll chant the refuges slowly together. Please join in if you'd like. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Taking your time, make any adjustments you might need. And in particular, we bring to mind our heart's commitment to non-harming, just valuing this integrity of our actions in the world, not wanting to cause ourselves and others harm. And no matter the particular circumstances of our lives, we bring to mind a sense of contentedness with what we have. All this is supportive of the heart settling in our meditation practice. In other words, we're on purpose, we're bringing to mind the trustworthiness of our own heart, the goodness of our own heart. It's not that it's perfect, but it's settling to remember that this heart cares and that this heart has the capacity to be content now with the conditions as they are, including the sensations of our body sitting in the posture. May not be perfect, but maybe they're good enough to just let them be. And then we can bring to mind our willingness to train our heart, and it arises, this willingness, this committedness. It arises simply from our learning over a lifetime. We have learned about the limitations of our habit energies, and in particular, the habits of the mind to worry and to spin in this way and spin in that way. And we have observed what that mental proliferation, what that sets in motion, what that, like the value of all that distractedness and obsessions and mental proliferation. So out of that comes a willingness to train the mind to be present. And it's really good at the beginning of a sitting period just to reflect. Yeah, I don't expect it to be easy, but I am willing to make this skillful effort, this relaxed persistence, to retrain the mind from whatever habits it has around distractedness and superficiality and reactivity and fixed views and obsessive vortexes that the mind can get lost in. Whatever those habits are, let's feel the heart's commitment to train the mind in a different direction. A non-entanglement, a non-identification with these patterns that will arise, will get triggered. But we don't have to, in a sense, take the bait by taking the pattern personally and then, in a sense, personally dragged around by that particular habit. So with all that in mind, then we can take up the Buddha's first instruction, which is to find a quiet place. The actual text says, "Gone to the forest, the root of a tree, an empty hut, one sits down, having folded the legs crosswise, keeping the body upright, having established mindfulness to the fore, mindful, one breathes in, mindful, one breathes out." So let's just, with real commitment, let's explore this first instruction in our own subjective experience, this body and mind right here. Establishing mindfulness to the fore. So we're remembering to recognize that this is being known, and even before directing your attention to the breath, just have that sense of establishing mindfulness right here, right in the middle, which is that simple recognition that this is being known. Remembering to be aware of what the mind is consciously knowing, consciously sensing, to be aware of that. And whatever it is that the mind is knowing, in order to be aware of that, it's simply recognizing right here and now what the mind is knowing. We don't have to direct the attention or bring the attention anywhere. It's all right here. This is what the mind is knowing. Whatever it might be, the experience of sitting, the experience of hearing Mark's voice, And in this space, this reflective space of knowing what the mind is knowing, interested in what the mind is knowing, the Buddha is asking us to be specifically sensitive, interested in that natural process of breathing in and breathing out. It's really simple. The sensations of breathing in and breathing out. The mind is already capable of being conscious, sensitive to this natural process of breathing in and breathing out, whatever that might feel like at this time. And we're making this relaxed, persistent effort to notice or to remember that this is being known, that the breathing in is being felt, and the breathing out is being felt, that sensitivity to the process of breathing in and out, the sensitivity is already here. But we're remembering that the mind is sensitive. We're keeping it in mind. And so it has to be fresh moment by moment by moment. This recognition that the mind is capable of being sensitive to breathing in through that duration of the inhalation and breathing out through that duration of the exhalation. And can we be interested without, because of habit, getting tight about it or controlling? Just allowing the body to breathe, but keeping it in mind. So we're developing this very specific mental muscle to be interested in what is usually quite ordinary and neutral, often doesn't come with any kind of charge. Can we be intimate and keep it in mind, and all at the same time just allow that natural process of breathing in and breathing out to be whatever way it is. And that doesn't mean it won't feel tight, or it might feel erratic or whatever it does feel like. That will be okay. We don't have any intention for it to be any particular way. And remember, we're developing and purifying this capacity to be interested in something ordinary, interested enough, committed enough to keep it in mind, to not forget it, all the way through one in-breath, and then all the way through one out-breath. So committed, that the mind naturally is willing to drop all the other forces or habits to do this or that. All of that, whatever those impulses might be, fall into the background. And besides this development of pure interest, there's also this wholeheartedness or this ardency, committedness, loyalty to the instruction. Even though we may not have perfect faith, it's useful to imagine that a deeply wise and compassionate person is instructing us because they care about us to train the mind in this way, telling us that it really leads to deep healing and deeper wisdom, more freedom in our lives. And now we're checking it out because we, to some degree at least, trust this person's wisdom and compassion for us. So we're going to follow the instructions. And the second instruction is all about recognizing the natural effect on the breathing process that arises with the settling and the stabilizing present moment awareness, the building of momentum. The breath generally goes from being grosser to being more refined. Longer and grosser, shorter, more refined. But of course it will be different for everyone. But generally the processes of the body reflect how the mind is. So as the mind settles and quiets, as it becomes more refined, then the bodily experience also becomes more simple, quiet, more refined, including the breathing process. Now we can't make that happen, but we can support the stabilizing and the unifying of the mind, this pleasure of simplicity and seclusion, by just following the instructions. While breathing in, just tracking the physicality of the breath. And notice if it's a longer or a shorter breath. While breathing out, just tracking the physicality of the out-breath, clearly enough to notice if it's a grosser or more refined out-breath. And just allowing this, being aware of the breathing process, allow this to be the most important thing. Willing to begin again and again. And ideally, we would persist in this relaxed way, wholeheartedly taking up the training, connecting, sustaining with this ordinary process of breathing in and breathing out, how it actually feels there in the body, in the chest, at the nostrils, or in the belly, or however you feel the breath coming in and going out. Until we have a clear sense of the pleasure of seclusion, the pleasure of the mind becoming more simple, simply because it's dropped so much distraction, flitting about here and there, thinking about this and that. And when you feel you have that taste, that flavor of seclusion, of the pleasure of simplicity, then you can make this change. This is the Buddha's third instruction. And he adds this piece. He says, one trains oneself. So in a way, it's a more specific kind of effort now, directing the attention to the whole body. So one trains oneself while breathing in, experiencing the whole body. And one trains oneself with each out-breath, experiencing the whole body. So we can still rely on that natural rhythm of breathing in and out. But as we feel the breath coming in, we're reminded to experience the whole body just as it is. And as we feel the breath going out, we're reminded again to open and feel the body, the totality of the body. And we're not looking for specific sensations in the body, places where there's a knot or there's some pain. Really interested in this more open, accepting, allowing of the totality of the body without any exception. So we're developing this particular skill to have a more inclusive awareness, not focused on a particular thing, but more that flavor of being open and inclusive to the whole bodily experience. Not having to pick and choose. You might feel a quality of fearlessness as you breathe in, opening in this more inclusive way, breathing out, opening in this inclusive way. And it can feel like a kind yes to the whole body with the in-breath, each out-breath. And you might naturally begin to sense a bodily calm, a bodily sense of well-being. And then practice. The fourth instruction is to train the mind, train the heart, to keep this bodily calm in mind as you breathe in. And to keep this bodily calm or bodily well-being in mind as you breathe out. And just allow it to develop, to spread, kind of healing between the mind and body now. We're realizing the mind that's not afraid to be sensitive or open to the whole body. And the result is a developing and pervasive calm, bodily calm. But the important thing here is to keep that wholesome pleasure, bodily calm, to keep it in mind. And our habit might be to bring the attention to where there's pain or where there's tension. So that's why it's a training. We're keeping in mind the good feeling in the body, not the bad feeling in the body. However faint it might be. 1/2 breath at a time. So remember, we're developing a new skill set to be aware in this inclusive way, to begin to sense that wholesome quality of well-being, embodied calm, embodied well-being, and to keep it in mind. All of this in the service of being more and more intimate with the way it is, starting with this bodily experience here. And just feeling everything happening on its own, nothing left out. Not in conflict with the bodily experience. And the fifth instruction, and we'll end here tonight, is simply to train yourself to notice that quality of lightness or joy as you breathe in, as you breathe out. And this lightness, this buoyancy is arising as the heart senses through its intimacy with the body. The heart senses how it's all happening on its own. So there's a subtle sense of dropping some of the ownership and sense of being the doer, and more of an abiding in just the activity of the present moment, the activity of the body. And the result is just a lightness of heart, being able to trust the present moment a little bit more. And just the dance of all of what's moving freely, because the heart isn't in conflict, isn't in the mode of struggling. And the result is a natural joy. So the Buddha just asks to train while you're breathing in to notice that lightness of the heart, that buoyant, bright quality to whatever degree you can. And then of course the same as you breathe out. We're keeping joy in mind, just as best we can, for another minute or two. And take a little time. You might even want to stand. Could somebody turn the top two lights on the panel on? About a third of the way. The slider on the side is about a third of the way up. And then you can, yeah, there you go. Thanks, Omkar. Yeah, and then the other one too, right next to it. Yeah, perfect. Good to see everybody tonight. Thanks for showing up. You know, you may not want to feel responsible, but the Buddhist Studies program, this community, right, we created together. So nobody shows up, no community, no study, no deepening. And I don't think anybody here would argue that it's perfect, but it's what we got. This opportunity to gather like this, to learn a little bit more these teachings from the Buddha, see if they might be useful for us, how they might be useful, what they set in motion, so we can become more independent. Oh, like just independent in understanding the nature of our own mind. And in particular, you know, from the point of view of the Buddhist perspective, in particular, what are the causes for stress and what are the causes for release? It's really good because there are elements of spiritual life that are really challenging. And if we don't have this context that I'm doing this to take care of myself in a very direct, immediate way, not something like, well, maybe if I'm lucky later, far down the road, there might be some benefit to the work I'm doing. And it's actually, whether we like it or not, it's our responsibility to sense how what I'm doing, the training I'm taking on, how it's useful. Like what makes this a skillful means? What makes this practice, like, especially this part, as I think Ajahn Sumedho said, you know, and he's not alone, it's probably, you know, somewhat true that there's nothing more infuriating than these initial instructions for mindfulness of breathing. I don't know if anybody attended the Sunday weekly practice groups yesterday. You know, we have one in the morning at 10:30 and then one in the evening here at the center at 7. The Sunday morning one's also online. But I did something I normally don't do, and I probably should do it more often, both personally but also just to offer it out as an instruction. I invited people to count their breaths because it's so edifying, and you could just weave this into your practice for a period of time, each sit, or some of your sits this next week. Once you get composed and you're settled, you establish mindfulness to the fore, and you're working with the first few instructions, then as you're breathing in, feeling the sensations of that inhalation, you can just quietly, in your mind, note 1. And then as you're breathing out, there are many ways to do the counting, this is just one way. As you're breathing out, then you would count 1 again. So 1 with the in-breath, 1 with the out-breath, 2 with the in-breath, 2 with the out-breath. See, you get the rhythm here, right? 3 with the in-breath, 3 with the out-breath. And see how far you go. And then if you get to 10, without any wavering, like if you wonder, where did I leave off? That means you've lost it, and you begin again with 1, with the next in-breath. Happily beginning with 1, right? And happily noticing any shame or whatever frustration that might arise. It's about learning about the nature of the mind and the nature of distractedness, that pattern of the mind flitting about, because that's what the mind has been allowed to do. It's become the habit of our minds to flit over here and to flit over there. And so the counting just sort of makes the mind accountable to the commitment it's made to follow the Buddhist instruction, to check it out. We're not saying we're going to follow it forever. We're just saying, for this 30-minute sit or however long you sit at home, because I'm taking this course, I'm just going to train my mind in this way, even if I have to start over 75 times in that 30 minutes. And get really interested in, not just in the connecting and the sustaining, but in those first moments of the wavering. Because distractedness doesn't just happen, right? It's a whole natural process. How the mind, in a sense, gets seduced to follow some impulse to bring this to mind, or to think about this, or to problem solve that, or to get lost in doubt about the practice, for example. There's any number of ways the mind can go. So I'd encourage you to explore that counting. And then when you get some momentum and you feel like you can have some continuity of present moment awareness, then really, this is sort of the second instruction, is really understanding how that natural process of breathing in and out will reflect the way the mind is. So as the mind is more settled, the breath generally follows. The particular quality of breathing in and out will follow how settled the heart is, right? When our mind is really agitated, our body's agitated. When the mind is really settled, the body, surprisingly, feels really good, even if we have injuries. That's why, people who have a lot of difficult physical stuff going on, medical crisis or whatever it might be, the nice thing to do is develop some samadhi. Because as the mind gets really settled, it doesn't have a problem with bodily sensations. It doesn't mean, to some degree, when the mind gets settled, the settledness of the mind will reveal how the body is holding tension in ways that isn't serving anybody's well-being, right? So a lot of the unnecessary layers of physical tension can be dropped. But there still, of course, can be, physical pain, even when we're not resisting it. But that gets transformed. And that's that fourth step of realizing, recognizing calm, bodily well-being. Because what we're noticing is the mind that knows, not having a problem being intimate with bodily sensations. So the calm is really the mind not having a problem with sensation. Because the body's just the body. So like pain in the body, what is the problem with pain in the body? The problem is the mind that doesn't like the pain in the body. See, we have a lot of simplistic and naive and wrong understanding about physical discomfort. I mean, most of us do. Because we haven't, we're just so arrogantly sure that pain is bad in and of itself. But mostly what makes pain bad is we don't know, the mind doesn't know, the heart doesn't know how to be with it, how to understand it, how to be close to it. Because we're arrogantly sure that the mind should resist it, or freeze up around it, or repress it so I don't know that it's there. Go somewhere, concoct something to think about, turn on a good movie so I don't have to be with it. So in our small groups tonight, just some things that might seem appropriate to share. Of course, you might have your own insights or challenging, beautiful, horrific experiences that happened this last week that you want to share with the group or whatever it might be. But it's these small groups are powerfully supportive in our practice, because when you sit down with 3 or 4 other people and you really receive what other people have to say, those people who don't pass but really are willing to generously say something about what they're learning, what their experience is, it really normalizes what it is to have a mind. So especially around this training where we're being asked to, again, this isn't the whole training, this is just the beginning part of the training. In the beginning, we're using specifically the sensations of the breath as an exclusive meditation object. So much of the rest of the 16 steps are really being aware of the mind, different aspects of the mind. But initially, the first few steps, we're really retraining the mind to just be attentive to this experience of breathing in and breathing out. So how's that been? Because we're learning about the experience of non-distraction. Like when I keep this in mind, then I can really track my habit of distraction. It just stands out. Because whenever I'm not intimate in an unwavering way with that natural process of breathing in or out, well, then I'm distracted by definition, right? And then that's interesting. Like, what is that force, and what is a natural counterweight to the force of distraction? And what I suggested in the instructions these last 2 weeks is the natural counterweight to the force of habit to be distracted, to the mind going wherever it goes, is to realize we can actually be interested in the meditation object, the physicality of breathing in. And some of you will feel the breath in a more general way, but some of you will find it useful to give yourself a very specific place, like to feel the touching at the nostril. So experiment with whether you feel the breath just more generally in the body, or whether having a more specific anchor is more suitable. And it may change. So like in the beginning, it might be very useful to have a specific one or more touch points that you can really connect with. And you know you're connecting with it when you're connecting with it. Like you know that feeling as this part of the solar plexus begins to rise with the in-breath. So you feel that movement, you know? And then maybe there's toward the end of the in-breath, there's another sensation that you can connect with. And at the beginning of the out-breath, there's a particular way you feel it. And then a little later. But later, you might, the experience of the breath may be just a kind of more subtle, energetic feeling that doesn't really even have a beginning and end. Remember I don't know, 6th grade, I was so impressed. One of my classmates at the science fair did something, is it a Mobius strip? Is that how you pronounce it? Mobius strip? You know, and she did this thing. I just thought it was so mind-blowing as a 6th grader. But there's that kind of flow when the body, breath, mind gets more subtle. There's a kind of energetic, the in and out. It isn't such a sort of grossly embodied thing that we normally might think of our breath as being. And the important point is we let the breath be the breath, whether it's gross or subtle, whether it feels like, twisted steel trying to move, or it feels like this just subtle current that's almost nothing, coming in, going out in a way that you can't even tell the difference. It becomes so refined, so subtle, so indistinct even in the sense of the body as things settle. And that's that whole piece, is like getting that transition from gross to refined, from distraction to non-distraction, and really getting the flavor becoming independent, like I really know, this mind knows the flavor of samadhi, because it has a very distinct flavor. And it's important to do it, for most of us at least, with a specific anchor. Because once we start to open up with the third instruction to the totality of the body, we really want to keep that flavor of seclusion, that flavor of samadhi, even as we allow for this natural inclusivity. Because it's subtly stressful, as you probably have noticed, to train with a specific anchor, just being with the sensations of breathing in and breathing out. And the samadhi that comes along with some momentum, some continuity, right? To just keep leaving everything, the other sensations of the body, keep leaving that in the background and keep attending to that current of breathing in and breathing out. So when we're ready for that third instruction, where the Buddha adds, one trains oneself, right? Because now we're training the mind. Okay, instead of just not forgetting the breath, let's specifically include the totality of the body as we're breathing in. And so here, the mind it will have different habits. It will feel like either avoiding some places or obsessing about some places in the body because they're predominant, they hurt or whatever. And how to have that, like, hey, you all belong, it all belongs. Everything belongs. It's the way it is. It belongs because it's the way that the body is right now as I breathe in. And then as we breathe out, hey, this is the way it is right now. You all belong, it all belongs. Nothing left out. So it has a kind of a metta vibe, and that loving kindness flavor there is really important, because as we go from more of an exclusive object to a more inclusive, there's likely to be a lot more energy, right? Because part of having a more, exclusive attention to, certain touch points that are related to the breath or something very specific, the mind feels a kind of safety precisely because it's not feeling like it has to be attentive to the more totality of our bodily experience. So as we experiment, with the third instruction, opening it up, you're going to be opening to a lot, the whole world of the body. And so we want to have enough of a clear sense, because we don't have to lose the samadhi, which is the non-distractedness, just because we're opening up. But it will be a new skill. Just like, you might be in a really quiet place. You might be up in the Boundary Waters canoeing by yourself for 2 weeks, and you might, after some time, unhooking from all of our addictions in the first few days, and then your mind might get accustomed to the simplicity, the lack of electronic devices, the lack of social interactions, the lack of civilized structures, and all of that. And then whatever that ease and peace, then it would be very appropriate for a practitioner to be very curious, like, whatever well-being I have, having been in the wilderness for 2 weeks, how might that be sustained as I get in my car, turn the radio on, start hitting bigger and bigger towns, different fast food places, start triggering different desires, and, thinking about starting up at work again, and reconnecting with relationships, and then actually getting home, and all of those triggers that are there at home, and connecting with people. What's actually in the way, like whatever the quality of the mind that we realized when we had that more secluded life, is that way of being that we realized completely dependent on being in the wilderness? Or could it be sustained? And that's a little bit what happens with this transition between the second instruction, where we're tracking the gross physicality of breathing in and out, to it becoming more refined as the mind becomes more willing to just follow the instructions. Right? Breathing in long, one knows I'm breathing in long. Breathing in short, one knows it's a more refined in-breath. Breathing out long, one knows it's a longer out-breath or grosser out-breath. Breathing out short or refined, one knows that. So we're just clearly aware of the breathing in, breathing out well enough to just discern whether it's a grosser or a more refined in or out-breath. That's all. It's not about controlling the breath. There's a lot of people get confused who've done yoga practices where there's a lot of, in the yogic tradition, a lot of pranayama, a lot of breathing practices where you are specifically controlling the breath. But we're not controlling the breath. We're observing nature. It's just that we happen to be using the breathing as a little subset of nature. Breathing in and breathing out is just an aspect of nature. And so we're learning to keep some ordinary aspect of nature in mind, with enough integrity, with enough loyalty, with enough relaxed persistence, that the mind drops its addiction to the diversity of experience. It just lets that all fall into the background. It's a huge letting go. It's a huge renunciation. I'll read something from Ajahn Chah, this famous Thai master, just because it's just, when we really taste that simplicity, that seclusion, it really stands out. He writes in a chapter, and I have this wonderful little chapter in our resources. There's a lot of good stuff in the resources if you haven't checked it out yet. And that's in the emails that I send out to the group. If the mind is at ease, if it's at peace, it will naturally be aware. As you keep doing it, the breath diminishes, becomes softer. The body becomes pliable. The mind becomes pliable. It's a natural process. Sitting is comfortable. You're not dull. You don't nod. You're not sleepy. The mind has a natural fluency about whatever it does. It is still. It is at peace. And then when you leave the samadhi, you say to yourself, wow, what was that? You recall the peace that you've just experienced, and you never forget it. Because this is our first taste, when it happens, or often one of our first tastes of what we'd say in Buddhism, a non-sensual pleasure, or an unworldly pleasure. Because it's not about what's there, it's not about the sense experience. You might say, it's about the sense experience. I was doing mindfulness of breathing, just like I might go for a bike ride or I might take a swim, but in this case I was doing mindfulness of breathing. That was my sensual activity and I got that experience. But the pleasure of seclusion is really the absence of distraction. That's what we're feeling. We're feeling what the mind isn't doing. The mind isn't getting pushed around by its liking and disliking, following this thought because it thinks it can get rid of a not liking, or following this other train of thought thinking it might get what it likes. That's worldly activity. So when we're with the breath, in a sense, we have this desire to be with the breath, right? But we're really limiting sensuality, right, in a powerful way. We're basically saying, honey, let's train ourselves so everything's off limits except the intimacy with this breathing process, and let's see what comes from that. And even as we start to get some momentum, and I think I mentioned this last week, we start to feel the pleasure of that seclusion. So being with the breath, that more subtle current of breathing in and out, it's really hard to distinguish what we're being aware of. It's hard to distinguish the current of breathing in and breathing out from the pleasure of that continuity of mindful awareness. They're so entwined, the pleasure of the simplicity of the mind with the object that's being known. We can't say, this is that and this is this other thing. All we know is there's an unworldly pleasure showing up, and the mind is naturally very interested in it. But we have to be careful in those moments not to believe that we need to think. We will think about it, but we don't want to believe we need to think about what's happening in my practice. We just want to keep doing what we're doing. When we get some samadhi, the point at that moment is to keep doing what you're doing, not to think, I'm getting some samadhi. But we will think, I'm getting some samadhi. That just happens. So we need to be forgiving. But we want to hear that instruction. Just keep doing what we're doing. What are we doing? We're tracking the breath. And as it gets more subtle, we're tracking the subtle breath in and out. And at some point, when there feels like there's some real clarity about this experience of seclusion, the simplicity of the mind feels like this, then just start realizing, whatever it is in the background, the other sensations of the body, just let them come into the foreground. Training myself, breathing in, experiencing the whole body. Breathing out, experiencing the whole body. And remember, if it's helpful, every once in a while, you can just drop in the actual phrases from the Buddha. And this is a perfect time before we break into small groups to remind you, thank you, Raha, for catching this typo. I don't know how mindful everyone else was, myself included, but I think there was a little typo, because the way it is the first instruction is, breathing in long, one knows I'm breathing in long, breathing in short, one knows I'm breathing in short, breathing out long, one knows I'm breathing out long, and I think this is where the typo was. Breathing out short, it should say, one knows I'm breathing out short, but I think it says breathing in short. Anyway, it's obvious if you look carefully. And this is just a little example of delusion, how the mind just will put in the right thing, and we don't really see clearly. So we're not good editors. So just to review before we break into small groups, these little powerful 20-minute interactions we have, it's a little sacred space we hold in confidentiality. Whatever is said there, we just leave there. Each person gets their 2.5 minutes. It's often nice for someone to be a timer. It's good to introduce yourself, say your name. People on Zoom can say where you're from, share your pronouns if you'd like. And then somebody volunteer to be first, and generally we go in clockwise direction. Each person gets their 2.5 minutes. Everyone else, you're just in that embodied listening. You're just in your body listening. You don't have to nod. You don't have to give any kind of feedback. You just give that person the space, that safe space, to share whatever they want to share. And if they pause, that's okay. You just hold the silence while they still have their time. It's always okay to pass. After you go around the group, then check in with the person who passed. They may want to speak after everyone else has spoken, or they may not, and that will be fine. People on Zoom, obviously you can't go in clockwise direction, so the person who goes, then just call on somebody when you're done after your 2.5 minutes, right? And then whatever time is left at the end, just for open discussion. That's the time if you want to ask clarifying questions, you didn't understand something someone said, then you can check in with them so that you really want to hear them. And so just your own experience with using the exclusive object. What have you learned about effort? Sometimes being too tight, too much. Sometimes being too loose, too little. How about that transition between the exclusive attention to the breath and what you learned in that, like opening up to the totality of the body? Was that easy? Was it hard? What did you notice? And then also the fourth instruction about sensing that bodily calm and well-being, and sensing how it can grow and start to touch, be felt everywhere, spreading, suffusing throughout the body when it's strong. What have you learned about that? What doubts have come up in any of these places? These are some of the things you might want to share. You might have your other ideas. And I want to just do a call out to Susan, who's going to be, for this class, helping the online people break into small groups.